Oh boy, wasn't Kirito just OP as fuck when he defeated all those goblins without breaking us? No, he wasn't. Let me explain. Cue the transition to Art Online Alicization Explained, featuring episode 4, Departure, as we wrap up the contents of Volume 9, Alicization Beginning, and leave on a journey outside of Rulid. As usual, I have timestamps available for topics in the pinned comment, so you can skip ahead since this is gonna be a long video with all the cut content in this episode. But if you're unfamiliar with my series, in Alicization Explained, I aim to provide the most accurate information by making direct comparisons between the anime and the source material, light novels, as well as talking about key details that you should keep in mind, scenes that were cut from the anime, and boy, we do have a lot of cutscenes this week. And of course, explain things where the anime failed to portray the situation properly. And I know from my stats that about 8% of you did not enjoy me talking about how inaccurate certain YouTubers were, comparing the anime to the quote-unquote books. But as a YouTuber and Wikia editor who values correct information above all else, I need to put a disclaimer and mention that I am here to provide you the most factually accurate information regarding Sword Art Online, and I'm glad that there are people like you out there, the remaining 35 to 40% who did not drop out of the video there. But without further ado, to, end the rant, we start with the highlight of this episode, the fight between Kirito and Eugeo against the band of goblins. I was glad to see they managed to course correct a bit by ensuring the episode starts with Eugeo and Kirito taking cover behind the rocks/ice after Eugeo decided to create a cliffhanger in the final episode by going out and shouting. As I mentioned in the previous episode, in the novels Eugeo had not done that, but they were still discovered behind the rocks by one of the goblins as they were coming up with a plan of attack, so that's effectively where the anime brought the situation to, which I was quite happy about. But the entire scene, goddamn, before I get to my criticism and explain certain things, just wow. The animation quality along with the choreography of the fight is absolutely top notch, as is the voice acting as expected from Sword Art Online. This fight was the cherry on top of the cake in Alicization Beginning Volume 9, and the anime did deliver it perfectly, an absolutely mesmerizing set piece to conclude Alicization Beginning, as we are preparing to move on to Volume 10, Alicization Running. Amazon affiliate links for the light novels in description. But with mesmerizing animation comes overly exaggerated movements, which I'm sure SAO haters will cherry pick this to harp on, so I need to snap out of excitement and return to the objective ground. The fight, while brutal, was not as flashy in reality, as Kirito was not a ninja jumping up and down and all around with the triple somersaults and stuff. It was a very grounded fight in general aside from the sword skills, but I'll start by providing the context first. The Goblin Band you see here are essentially among the lowest tier of enemies you can find around. According to Kirito's assumptions, they are not even a fighting squad, they are just a scouting squad. The goblins that Kirito rushes past at the beginning are very lightweight, more or less smaller than his size, that's why he easily pushes them off as they planned with Eugeo behind the rocks. The only real threat here is the Goblin Lord Ugachi leading the group, who is about more than double the size of Kirito and with a more barbaric fighting experience. And on top of that, of course, this fight was the first instance that Kirito realized the existence of sword skills in Underworld, unlike what the anime portrayed in episodes 2 and 3. Being scared against the goblins, as he had realized these were real artificial fluctlights rather than the traditional AI, Kirito instinctively assumed the starting position of the Aincrad one-handed sword skill, Sharp Nail, and while he was getting ready to just imitate the movements manually, the sword he was carrying that was lower than his object authority level, which meant Kirito could actually wield it to its full potential, unlike the Blue Rose sword in the previous episode, started glowing with a reddish light to his surprise and took control from Kirito's hands as the skill was unleashed. And a key detail as to why Kirito got hit so easily by the Goblin Lord instantly was because his Aincrad instincts took over in this case after the sword skill was unleashed, and he assumed he would get stuck in a post-skill delay and that the Goblin Lord, much like a traditional mob, would suffer blowback. But that wasn't the case. The Goblin Lord was no traditional mob, he was a living creature with consciousness and instantly hit back at Kirito, which completely shattered every hope Kirito had. Unlike the previous worlds, where quote-unquote the Black Swordsman never gave up despite the blows he suffered, Underworld was not a game, it was a simulation with pain programmed in realistically. While experienced with certain sword reflexes, as I talked about in my Journey to Alicization videos, Kirito the Swordsman was never properly tested by true pain, and that was his undoing in Underworld. Even the small cut on his arm was enough to freeze him. This was the moment Kirito knew he had lost with absolute terror in his eyes. Eugeo, however, remembering how useless he felt when Alice was taken away, had to act. It's not that he wasn't scared shitless in this case, he certainly was, he just would not be able to bear the regret of losing another friend because he was powerless to do anything again. Eugeo did not attack here to survive, as he already did not have any experience with a sword at all in the first place. He attacked so Kirito would survive and was promptly disposed of by Ugachi, who was not affected as much by the luminous element Eugeo carried with him. Kirito rushed to Eugeo, who had a huge cut in his body due to the blunt sword of the Goblin leader. Eugeo was content with his condition, that this time around he had tried his best. He talked about a distant memory, a promise between kids, 3 of them, Eugeo, Kirito and Alice. Just like they had born on the same day, they would die on the same day. Memories flashed in Kirito's mind again, just like the time they did when he first arrived in the world and heard the sound of an axe. Kirito felt the guilt filling his body, overtaking the feeling of pain, much like it had happened to Eugeo moments earlier. The promise, no, his promise, he was not gonna break again. The pain he felt was nothing compared to the anguish of losing a friend, of not fighting for that promise. In the end, he did manage to win, in a much more grounded fight mind you, without jumping and rolling in the air. But one of the questions I received was why Kirito did not kill all the other smaller goblins. Well, first off, the small goblins were no real threat in the first place. Second, and more importantly, as you can probably see, there is currently a person dying on the floor in the puddle created by his own blood that Kirito wanted to tend to, which is why he hoped this would make the goblins run away. In the novels, one of the goblins even tried challenging Kirito by starting a long-winded sentence trying to tell he would beat him, but Kirito didn't even bother listening due to the time constraints and cut him off mid-sentence and destroyed him. All the goblins after this run off, and the rest of the scene is pretty damn faithful, except for a minor thing, again an oversight on the animation studio, since Eugeo should have had an object authority level that is higher or at least equal to 45 after defeating the Goblin Band, which I'll get back to in a bit in a future scene. But here, Selka mentions that a healing art would no longer work in this case, and mind you, the quote-unquote high-level sacred arts she mentions is not mentioned to be a healing art, as it literally isn't. It exists to transfer durability from one person to another, not to heal someone out of nothing. As Kirito was about to lose consciousness now during this process, he saw something. He wasn't certain if it was his imagination or if the occurrence was real. A figure in golden light appeared behind Kirito and told that she would be waiting for Kirito and Eugeo on top of the central cathedral in Centauria, the building that towered the human realm where the Axiom Church resided. Kirito, unable to make sense of what he witnessed and having lost the majority of his life during the process, lost consciousness. The next scene, both Eugeo and Kirito were having a more successful day with their swings, and the reason is right there on the screen. They paid enough attention to Kirito's Statia window this time around, as his object authority is now level 46, akin to what you would call a level up in RPG games after their experience back in the cave. I don't know if you ever heard about the concept of leveling up, but this resulted in both kids having a much easier day with the axe, and of course the reason why Kirito is able to wield the Blue Rose sword successfully as well. It had been 2 days since they returned from the cave, very late at night, which was cut from the anime. Gaswood Tsuberg, the village elder, and Sister Azalia of the church attempted to scold them, but Kirito threw the head of the goblin on the ground, resulting in a shockwave among the townsfolk. At this point, it became very clear that the studio wanted to wrap up Alicization beginning with the hype of the goblin fight though, as a whole lot more was either skipped or changed to provide an incredibly fast narrative that glossed over quite a lot of things. After Kirito talked to Eugeo about the otherworldly events of that day, he grabbed the Blue Rose sword, slashed Gigas Cedar and handed it over to Eugeo, comforting him that he was certain Eugeo would be able to wield the sword. The order of these events were changed significantly. Eugeo in the light novels was having a much harder time at coping with his own will to become a swordsman due to his beliefs in the taboo index and the imperial law, as having multiple callings was forbidden, and Eugeo's task was to cut down the tree. While Eugeo was fighting an inner war, Kirito had decided to trust in Eugeo's decisions, and eventually the boy emerged, asking Kirito to teach him the techniques of Aincrad style. Sadly, the emotional high point of the scene was used later on in another scene. In the novels, it was the emotional high point of Eugeo's breakdown. It was when Eugeo confronted what he truly wanted and got up to ask for Kirito's help that he said those words. "I've been waiting for you, Kirito, waiting here in the forest for 6 long years for you to come." As Kirito had comforted them with his reply, "I'm sure that I woke up in the forest in order to meet you, Eugeo." Just 5 days after Kirito started teaching Eugeo the ways of Aincrad style, a full week after they returned from the End Mountains, they had managed to topple down Gigas Cedar with a thunderous roar that was heard very clearly in Rulid. Kirito had no clue why sword skills existed in Underworld in the first place, as what it was built upon, the seed provided by Kaya by Kiko, did not come with the package of sword skills, which was the reason why Gun Gale Online did not have sword skills either. But they existed here in Underworld for a reason, and it had just granted them a gigantic triumph. Later that night, the town of Rulid celebrated the felling of the Gigas Cedar. Another thing that was omitted from the adaptation was that, well, many people were disturbed by the fact that Eugeo had not accomplished this goal by traditional means, and they even wanted to punish him and Kirito, but the village elder Gasfoot Tsuberg brushed off these complaints and set up the festival instead to grant Eugeo for his wish regarding his future calling. But the prior knowledge that was omitted is quite minor compared to the ones coming up ahead. Eugeo continued to have inner conflicts when he was asked about what he wanted to become, so much so that Kirito even was scared that he would choose to remain safe in Rulid, effectively ruining his plans of heading to the central capital Santoria with him, but Selka had calmed him down. She had said that she knew Eugeo would choose to follow his dream. And after Eugeo proved Selka right, it wasn't a smooth decision either, as the current man-at-arms of Rulid, the kid you saw in episode 2, Zink, objected Eugeo's decision to head for Zakaria Sword Academy and claimed that he held that right and challenged Eugeo to a duel, refuting the village elder Gasfoot, who was attempting to respect Eugeo's decision. Eugeo had kind of forcefully agreed to this request, but was unsure on how to proceed. He was incredibly nervous when Kirito arrived at his side. Taking life was forbidden by the taboo index, so suggesting Eugeo to use a sword skill on Zink was troublesome to say the least, as there was no way to cancel out a skill in progress. Kirito suggested Eugeo to use the one-hit sword skill, Horizontal, not focusing on Zink, but his sword. When they got up to the stage, Zink was already thrown off by the aura that Blue Rose sword was spreading. He tried to imply that Eugeo would need to use a different sword if that one was not his, but Eugeo was stern in his reply. He had found the sword in the northern cave and the Blue Rose sword belonged to him now. He kept his confidence in their battle as well, as Zink was the first to attempt a strike. Eugeo kept his cool, focused, but shocked Kirito. The skill he initiated was not horizontal that Kirito had recommended him. Eugeo's Blue Rose sword glowed a deep blue. It was the diagonal one-hit skill, Slant, a technique that Kirito had not yet showed Eugeo. With this single downward hit, Eugeo had shattered Zink's sword and silenced all opposition, earning the right to head south towards Zakaria to become a swordsman. That night, when Kirito was back at his bed in the church, Selka was there as well. That was when Selka decided to open up to Kirito rather than the festival location in the anime. She talked about Eugeo and Alice. Kirito comforted her as she was getting teary eyes again, but admiring Selka, a so-called artificial fluctlight, Kirito had started to have existential doubts on his own. This was a key moment that was not even included in the anime for obvious time reasons, but Kirito had started to contemplate if his consciousness was the quote-unquote real Kirito, or was he just a copy of himself stored inside the Light Cube cluster inside Wrath servers. Would he be bound by the taboo index or the imperial law of Underworld? would he have another mental block that originated from the quote-unquote real Kirito? There was only one way to find out: to do something that the real Kirito would never do in his right mind. She leaned in on Selka and kissed her forehead as an oath that he would ensure he would return with Eugeo and Alice on his side, safe and sound at the end of his journey. A promise he held very dear to his heart, a promise that would define the journey he was departing on. A promise that he would be running towards with every ounce of his existence in the upcoming novels. Eugeo's promise to Selka the next morning, however, was an anime original scene that conveyed the same idea as the one that was omitted. The existential conflict of Kirito was just outright sacrificed in the process. But you may ask what Kirito was carrying on his back when the duo departed on their long journey. Well, glad you asked that, because when they were heading to Zakaria, yet another scene was omitted. When they were passing where Gigas Cedar used to stand tall, the previous carver of Gigas Cedar, Old Man Garita, was waiting for them there. He suggested that they should cut off a specific branch of the tree and take it with them, with specific instructions on what to do with it. Kirito and Eugeo obliged and wrapped up the twig in cloth that Kirito strapped to his back. The duo set out on their journey, running towards Zakaria and further. Seeing that I answered the questions I received during the regular course of the video, a damn long video at that due to all the cut content in this episode, I can spare you guys the #AskGamerturk segment. Remember that if you want the amazing knowledge that I have been bestowed upon by the goddess of creation Stacia, you can find the Amazon affiliate links to the light novels in the description. If you grab the books for yourself and support my channel, Stacia is bound to bless you with knowledge to ensure you don't fall prey to the tricks of the god of darkness, Vecta, who is spreading misinformation through various YouTubers who did not accept Stacia as their true goddess, unlike I have. Next episode is titled Ocean Turtle. Well, you may be confused if you haven't read the source material. That means we will be moving on to the next book. As I mentioned in my Alicization opening explained video, with the contents of volume 9 titled Alicization Beginning coming to an end, you can expect minor changes to the opening sequence next week. It's almost certain that at the very least the watermark will switch over from beginning to running to reflect the switch to volume 10 titled Alicization Running. Brand new characters wait for us. We'll get to learn more about the royalty and nobles in the human realm as Kirito and Eugeo tackle their next challenge in Zakaria. We'll spend some time in real life and get to meet new characters in the name of Takeru Higa and Kojiro Rinko that we saw in the opening, as well as other returning characters that you know. Meanwhile, Kirito and Eugeo will cross paths with new people as well, the likes of Sortiliana Serlut, Golgoroso Balto, Volo Levantine, Humbert Zizek and Rayos Antonios, a brief introduction to Tisa and Ronia, and the mysterious observer keeping some checks on an abnormality within the system, with many more mysteries to follow. I do hope you continue to enjoy the Explained series throughout this long journey that is Alicization. If you made it this far into the video, let me know by adding "Time for Alicization Running" to your comment. As always, it's a pleasure to bring these videos to you, and I hope you are as excited for Alicization Running content as I am. As always, huge thanks to my patrons on patreon.com/Gamerturk, Tiffany, Canlish Red Bolt Ulysses, and new patrons Stacia and Abbas. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.